Our plugin of the week is the McDSP 6030 Ultimate Compressor. And it's more like a plugins of the week because what the McDSP 6030 compressor is a whole series of compressors. You actually have, I think, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's like 10 compressors, 10 different compressors that show up in this unit. So it looks a little bit like one of those API racks, 500 series, where you plop in like all these different components and then you have controls on them. And so what they've done is they've put a series of compressors that are, most of them, not all of them, are emulations of vintage components. So the U670 is the Fairchild 670. And so, and the main controls on the Fairchild, other than input and output gain, are the threshold and the time constant, which is sort of the release characteristic. Then there is the Mu tube, and this is an emulation of the Veramu compressor by Manley. So you could see that they sort of emulate a little bit of that. And they definitely say that they changed some of the attack release characteristics. So they've tweaked them. So they're not meant to be perfect modelings. The iComp is just some other beast onto itself, just something that they've created. The Opto-C is an LA2A in compression mode, and then there's an LA2A in limiter mode. And so you got that. The British C is, and they don't say this, so this is just from my, just like looking at the settings, seeing exactly what it is, and listening to the sound. This is what they sound like to me, and some of them are like U670. I mean, come on. And then you could look at the controls. This is like a Neve 33609. Or there's also another Neve compressor, which is like the V-Comp, which is the 2254 E compressor. And then they have what they call Over Easy, which is a DBX compressor, 165. The SST76, which is like an 1176. And then they have their FRG 444 compressor, which is like their own creation here. It sort of sounds to me, just like the way that they have it here, it somewhat sounds like the 1176 when it's in hyper compression mode, which is kind of cool. And then they have this other heavy duty compressor, which I can't quite figure out. It almost sounds to some degree like it's like a little bit like the SSL Smart compressor. There was a guy, Smart, who invented the VCA compressor for bus compressor for the SSL consoles, and then he left and he started up his own company called Smart. And so with this, all in this one plugin unit, you get all these different things. Now, what's really cool about this, amongst all the other things, is like if I say want a slow or medium attack and a fast release, and I set those settings, when I switch between the different components, it maintains those same attack release and basic threshold settings through each of the different individual plugins, which is really cool because then I could set a basic setup and then I could go through and say, gee, what does this mix sound like through, you know, like this mock sort of SSL compressor, and like with a certain... And then see what this sounds like with their Froggy compressor. 1176. The thing about this 1176 is that they invert the numbers. Like if you go to a true 1176, the 7 setting is a fast attack or fast release. And here they actually invert it. So be aware of that. It's actually more the way that you would think about it, right? And then you get the DBX sound. Right, that sort of VCA compressor kind of sound. 33609. LA2A in limiter mode. This is also like the peak reduction thing. The higher you set it, the less it compresses. So it's sort of backwards, so it acts a little bit more like a threshold control. Which is like for those, that's just their peak reduction. So the higher you set it, the more gain you get. And this is sort of the opposite, the way that this works. In compressor mode, this is just you setting a ratio, and as you set the ratio on this iComp, it changes the attack release settings based off of your threshold and ratio settings. So it just sort of in the background is doing whatever. And then you get the, this is really great. I love this, the Veramu compressor. And the Fairchild compressor. So it's really cool because you can go through each of these different settings and maintain the same basic threshold attack release settings as you go through each of them. Now, some of them, because they don't have attack and release times, then you're getting what that particular unit does, right? So, for example, on an LA2A, you don't have an attack time setting. You're basically determining that by setting it to compressor or limiter mode. That's basically determining how it's dealing with the incoming signal, and it's basically like a fixed threshold kind of compressor, or like the 1176 is like that. It actually 1176 doesn't have a threshold; it has an input gain with a fixed threshold, and so that there's just things like this that you can sort of get over, but the basic idea is very cool. And then you can also key any of these, and you can listen to the key signal, and you got an output gain or makeup gain control, and it's very cool because in terms of it being like an all-in-one unit where you can flip through a lot of different vintage components, and then you're only taking the CPU load for whichever one you select. It's very cool, very low latency plugin, and it sounds really good. It sounds really good. I can't say that they're like the closest emulations. I kind of like a lot of the Waves emulations of some of these saved components. They're much more true to the originals, and the Universal Audio stuff is also very good with that type of stuff, but they sound really, really good. And McDSP is a really good company. They're really good with that type of thing. So I really dig this one. It's a really cool one. So check this out, and take a look at it, because it's a great deal. And if you're looking for like getting a whole ton of vintage compressors in a single package thing, it's really, really like a cool setup. And this has been out for a couple years, so it's not a brand new plugin, but very, very cool nonetheless. All right, so there is the McDSP 6030 Ultimate Compressor, giving you a nice selection, of plugins.